Thank you. I call the member for Whitsunday.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker, and I am pleased to be able to contribute to the debate on this very important piece of legislation, the Youth Justice and Other Legislation Amendment Bill, which unfortunately for many across our state will not go far enough and will not leave them with the confidence tonight that they are safer in their home, nor walking their dog down the street, nor ensuring that their property is protected or that they can wake up tomorrow knowing their car isn't stolen and that hasn't caused a fatal accident. But I do hope that this legislation takes some small steps at a point in time when parts of our state, and in particular in North Queensland, are screaming out for some real action. And I support my colleague, the member for Burdekin, in his moving of the amendment as well, that the opposition is pleased to contribute as part of this debate, because it is in line with what consumer and community expectation is across this state. In the wake of tragic circumstances, and I note the minister outlined that precipitated this bill, it shouldn't take tragic circumstances, Madam Deputy Speaker. It shouldn't take multiple tragic circumstances for government to act. It should be about early intervention. It should be about prevention. And while I do acknowledge the ministers have outlined that there will be considerable funding, another $100 million allocated to this very challenging societal situation that we see our state confronted with, we've already seen the state government invest $500 million. And out of that $500 million, we have seen repeat recidivists, an increase in the severity of their crimes, a cohort of 10% that now accounts for nearly 50% of the significant and serious youth crime across our state. And I'd like to draw the House's attention to what would be a simple risk matrix of community safety, looking at the likelihood of risk and the consequence of the impact of that risk. And we've seen that sadly played out in the tragic loss of lives, the continuous rate of crime, the break and enters in homes, as well as stolen vehicles that parade at high speed across regional Queensland, risking people's lives. I do note, and I outlined the principal features of this legislation, is to provide the legislative framework required to trial the use of electronic monitoring devices as a condition of bail for some offenders aged 16, 17 years who have committed a prescribed indictable offence and have previously found guilty of one or more indictable offences. And as outlined by QCOS in the committee's report, I also share their concerns that a pilot of electronic monitoring program for 16 to 18-year-olds that was held in New York City was labelled a failure. While I don't want to assume, I certainly will be looking with interest and monitoring the outcome of this trial. But as to a point that my colleague made, I don't know if the government has actually considered the societal way in which youth offending is taking place. And it is all about social media. It is all about taking things to the next level. It is all about the way in which they influence to ensure that they can just up the notch of the dangerous activity that they undertake. And if this trial and the funding, the some $39 million that's going to be allocated for the rollout, has not considered simply how these devices can easily be removed, the fact that young people will need access to a charging station, the fact that they need access to a mobile device, and ironically also that we've assumed that they come from a mum and dad family that actually care about their whereabouts as well. I think there are a lot of assumptions in this legislation where we will see its shortfall in the coming months as well. I also wanted to highlight the level of investment as part of the reforms the government is so proud of, and one was significant in the lead-up to estimates last year. And I'd like to refer to the failed bail houses and in particular the amount of crime that had occurred out of that. What a disaster, absolutely. And the fact that that disaster was simply announced on the day in which the opposition would have interrogated the failings of that program, was just incredible when it comes to transparency. Certainly throughout that time, in the 3 years that bail houses that were operational, and I draw the House's attention because if you don't think this has contributed to the high rate of crime, the generational impact on young people, it has. 5,648 offences were committed by 210 young people post-bail house. And while I do, and I give credit to the minister that acknowledged that it was not successful, it wasn't a good return on investment for the taxpayers at a cost of $30.8 million and 2 consultancy reviews that had to tell the government that bail houses was failing. We're now still seeing and wearing the results of that in the continued recidivism of young people. I'd also like to highlight to the House as well the impact of crime and some of the highlights that were in the report and outlined by the committee, and in particular the consultation. And I will thank the committee that did travel the state, and I know the people of Townsville and North Queensland that I am pleased to be engaged with, and my office receives numerous phone calls from because of the lack of inaction of their own state MPs, that they were very much pleased that the committee travelled and the committee took the time. The committee took the time to listen to their concerns about the fear that they live every single day. And now that's being translated into my own community as we see these repeat offenders, Madam Deputy Speaker, that travel down from Townsville to Mackay consistently because they're not happy enough stealing cars in Townsville. They'll now steal cars in Mackay and the northern beaches of Mackay. And just recently, in my own electorate, we had youth offenders, 14-year-olds, 11 to 14-year-olds, travelling around, stolen vehicles that were then found in Townsville as well. The mayor, when I was in local government served, had his car stolen and dumped. Repeatedly, the amount of serious offences and the fact that it now has an economic cost. It's having an economic cost on small business owners. I just spoke to a mowing franchisee who is hastily awaiting this legislation because their small business relies on having a vehicle and a trailer. But what happened only a few weeks ago in Mackay? It was stolen, and there are no consequences. And the same youth offender who is under 16 has repeatedly offended with no consequences. So while my colleagues have outlined the detail of the bill, and I'm sure many more will, I want to focus on the practicality of how this bill will translate to mums and dads, to the elderly that are living in fear in their homes in Townsville, to families who are not being supported when they have young teenagers that really don't know where to turn and don't know what to do. And I don't want the assumption to just be the link between young people that don't have a family, because I know many and several of my constituents who have come out, who have fallen, sadly, their young people have fallen by the wayside under the influences of youth recidivism, and see that as an alternative to going to school, to taking responsibility for themselves. And unfortunately, they don't know where to turn. So I certainly hope the government's investment in support services does a little bit better than what it has in the last 5 years with the $500 million of investment, because certainly there are many that are not seeing that investment across our community. I also just want to make mention of a very dear friend of mine and colleague whose husband was stabbed just over 12 months ago in the township of Serena by a repeat youth offender. And that youth offender had been let out time and time again on bail and only now is locked up. But that man nearly lost his life, and if it wasn't for the doctors who took immediate action, he would not be here today. And so this bill, this legislation, needs to protect individuals whose lives are under threat. Thank you.
Thank you. Member